Okay, let's dive into the numbers today for a pretty specific market. The global elbow orthoses market. You know, those braces and supports for elbow issues.
Right, the ones you see for tennis elbow or after an injury.
Exactly. And we've got a report here that's just packed with data, revenue figures from 2021, and then projections looking ahead to 2025 and even out to 2033.
And it breaks it down by region and country, which is helpful.
It is. So our mission really in this deep dive is to kind of cut through all that raw data, get a handle on the big picture globally, and really pinpoint where the significant growth is happening, or at least where it's projected to happen across the world over the next decade, according to this source anyway.
Makes sense. Get beyond just the top line number.
Yeah, because here's where it gets really interesting. The report's main headline number tells us this market was already, over $184 million back in 2021?
That's right, $184.717 million, precisely.
Okay, and it's slated for significant growth. But what does that growth actually look like when you spread it across the globe? Let's unpack the source.
Sure. So looking at those global figures provided, it was, as we said, $184.716 million in 2021. The projection shows it climbing to about $227.1 million by 2025,
Okay.
and then reaching approximately $343.276 million by 2033.
Wow, okay. So a pretty decent climb over the next decade or so?
Yeah, it represents an overall global compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of 5.3% over that entire period.
5.3% globally. That sounds like a steady, consistent upward trend shown in the report.
It is pretty solid growth globally.
But, a global average like that can often hide a lot of variation underneath, right?
Absolutely. That's why the regional breakdown is key.
Okay, so let's unpack that regional data the report gives us. See where the real hot spots might be. Where should we start? North America.
Sounds good. In North America, the regional revenue is, well, it's quite substantial. It was $78.135 million in 2021.
All right, the biggest chunk so far.
Definitely. And the report projects this will grow to around $94.5, maybe $94.6 million by 2025, and then hitting over $138.684 million by 2033.
Okay, still leading the pack in terms of size. Does the source break it down further?
It does, yeah. Gives us country's level detail. So the United States, unsurprisingly, makes up the largest portion. It shows steady growth with CAGR just under 4.8%, around 4.78%.
Okay, almost 5%.
But interestingly, Canada stands out a bit within the region. Its projected CAGR is higher, over 5.6%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 5.638%. So that's higher than both the U.S. and Mexico, which the report puts at around 5.057% CGR.
Huh. That is interesting how Canada's showing that slightly faster growth rate, according to the source, even though the U.S. market is obviously much larger overall.
Right. Different dynamics at play, perhaps.
Okay, let's move across the Atlantic then. The report seems to give us quite a bit of detail for Europe.
It does. Europe is another significant regional market, though. Smaller than North America. It started at $36.758 million in 2021.
And projected out?
Projected to reach over $64 million, $64.193 million by 2033. So still substantial growth.
And lots of countries listed here in the source data.
Yeah, quite a few. You've got the major economies like Germany, the UK, France. They're key contributors nationally.
Any standouts there?
Well, the source specifically calls out Germany. It has a notable CAGR mention, nearly 5.5%.
Yeah.
5.495% to be exact.
Okay, so Germany's growth rate is actually higher than the U.S. rate based on these projections.
That's right. It suggests, strong projected growth there relative to some of the other European markets detailed, like France or Italy, which are a bit lower.
Right. So steady growth for Europe overall, but Germany looks like a key driver within that region, at least according to the source's projections.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's jump over to Asia Pacific. The report seems to really highlight this region as, particularly dynamic.
Yes, Asia Pacific is definitely where we see the most accelerated growth projected in this report. The region's revenue goes from $40.268 million in 2021.
Okay, starting a bit higher than Europe.
A bit higher, yeah. And it's projected to reach $84.103 million by 2033, almost catching up to North America's 2025 number.
Wow, so a big jump percentage-wise.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
America's 2025 number.
Wow, so a big jump percentage-wise.
Huge jump. This puts Asia Pacific's regional CGR at over 6.3%, 6.339%. That's significantly higher than the global average of 5.3% we talked about.
Okay, 6.3% for the whole region. Does it break that down?
It does. It highlights major markets like China and Japan, of course. But what's really fascinating here, and the report calls this out, is the growth rate projected for India.
India, what's the number?
A very high CAGR of 7.45%.
Whoa, 7.45. That's a lot higher.
It's the highest country-specific CAGR mentioned in a source across all the regions we've covered so far.
That's a substantial difference. So Asia-Pacific overall is growing faster than the global average, clearly, but India is really standing out within that region according to these projections.
Precisely. It really makes you wonder what's driving that specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. What factors might be contributing to such accelerated growth there compared to, say, North America or even Germany? The numbers certainly spark that question. Okay, let's shift gears. How about South America?
South America. Now, the market here is smaller than the regions we've just discussed. It started at $11.452 million in 2021,
Okay.
and it's projected to reach just over $22 million by 2033.
Still roughly doubling over the period, though.
True, the growth rate isn't insignificant. The report details several countries, Brazil being the largest contributor to the regional numbers provided.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile, others also show steady contributions and growth projected over the period.
So Brazil looks like the main player in the South American figures presented here.
Got it.
What about the Middle East?
The Middle East shows revenue reported at $9.79 million in 2021.
Okay.
And that's expected to grow to over $18.5 million, $18.595 million by 2033.
Similar size market to South America, roughly. Any standouts?
The source points to Saudi Arabia as the leading country by revenue within this region. It contributed over $3 million back in 2021 and is projected to reach nearly $6 million by 2033.
Okay.
Other countries listed, like Turkey and the UAE, are also significant contributors to that regional total.
Right. And finally, let's look at Africa. That's the last region detailed in this report, isn't it?
That's correct. Turning to Africa, the market revenue was $8.312 million in 2021. So the smallest regional market in this data set.
And the projection?
Projected to reach over $15.6 million, $15.657 million by 2033.
Okay. Any specific countries highlighted?
Yes. The report specifically highlights South Africa and Nigeria as the kind of key countries within the region's numbers that are presented. Both show steady growth trajectories over the forecast period. South Africa has the larger share of the two mentioned.
So South Africa and Nigeria leading the way in the data presented for Africa. Interesting.
Right. So if we try and, connect all these numbers from the source back to the bigger picture.
Yeah, let's synthesize.
We see a clear, consistent global growth trend for this elbow orthoses market projected out over the next decade. That seems pretty evident from the data.
Definitely.
But as we've just unpacked, this growth isn't uniform across the board, is it?
Not at all.
It's being significantly propelled by specific regions, with Asia-Pacific showing that notably faster expansion. And within that, countries like India really stand out in these projections.
And, why should these numbers matter to you listening? Well, this kind of market growth, it isn't happening in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It hints at potentially powerful underlying demand factors, maybe things related to healthcare access improving or demographic shifts like aging populations in some areas.
Or maybe increasing sports participation, lifestyle trends, things worldwide that are just increasing the need for products that support elbow recovery and joint health generally.
Yeah.
And this brings up an important question, I think, that these numbers from the report prompt. What specific factors within those high-growth regions like Asia-Pacific broadly or specifically India or even Canada and Germany we noted, what's creating the conditions for that faster expansion compared to other areas?
Right. The numbers show us where the growth is projected.
But digging into the why behind those regional differences, that would offer even deeper insight. What isn't explicitly in these revenue numbers that could explain the trends? Things like specific injury prevalences, healthcare infrastructure differences, maybe even product innovation adoption rates.
Yeah.
The numbers raise the questions.
Absolutely. Well, that pretty much wraps up our deep dive into the revenue trends of the global elbow orthoses market based on this particular report anyway. We've definitely seen that overall upward trajectory and identified those regional and country hotspots showing, accelerated expansion projected over the next decade or so.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider based on all this. Okay. Seeing this steady projected increase in demand reflected in these global numbers, what might that imply about the future challenges, but also the opportunities in joint health and orthopedic support, especially in what seems to be an increasingly active world, but also, in many places, an aging one?
Yeah, definitely something to mull over.
Food for thought.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the numbers today. Okay, let's get into this. It feels like almost everyone bumps into elbow issues at some point, right? Could
Yeah,
be from work, sports, or, well, just life. And when that happens, getting the right support is pretty crucial.
absolutely. And that brings us right to the topic, the elbow orthoses market.
Right, those braces and supports specifically for the elbow.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're leaning heavily on some fresh insights from cognitive market research.
Okay, so our goal today is simple. Break down their findings for you. We want to look at what's pushing this market forward, what's kind of holding it back.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
Findings for you. We want to look at what's pushing this market forward, what's kind of holding it back, and where the really interesting new stuff is happening.
Right. And, the research points very clearly to one main driver.
Which is?
Just a sheer increase in elbow problems. We're talking injuries, chronic conditions, the whole range. Things like repetitive strain from desk jobs, sports injuries, of course, but also conditions like tennis elbow, that lateral epicondylitis.
Arthritis?
So specific things driving demand, definitely. The report actually projects a pretty noticeable growth rate, a solid CAGR, for this market because of conditions like those.
Wow. Okay, so more need. But it's not just that, is it? The tech is getting better, too. We're not talking about those clunky old braces anymore.
Oh, absolutely not. Technology is making a huge difference. Think new materials, lightweight stuff, composites, advanced plastics.
Lighter, but still strong.
Exactly. Stronger support, but way less bulky. And they're designing them smarter, too, thinking about the biomechanics, how to, shift stress away from the injured bit. Much more comfortable.
And does the whole move towards home recovery play into this as well? People doing more rehab on their own?
It really does. Yeah. Healthcare is shifting that way. Outpatient, home-based care. So you need devices people can actually use easily themselves, adjust them, manage them without a clinician right there. Manufacturers are definitely focused on that user-friendliness.
Okay, so demand's up, tech's improving. Sounds good. But what are the snags? The research must point out some challenges, right?
Oh, for sure. The big one, consistently, is cost.
Ah, always cost.
Yep. Especially for the really advanced custom-fit ones, the ones using the latest tech. They can be pricey.
And insurance doesn't always cover it?
Often not adequately, no. So the patient ends up footing a big chunk of the bill, which, unfortunately, means some people who'd really benefit just can't afford it.
That's a major hurdle for access, then. What else? Are the devices themselves still sometimes tricky?
Yeah, usability is still flagged as an issue. Even with better materials, some people find them uncomfortable, or they get skin irritation, or they just struggle to get the fit right.
Right.
And if it's not comfortable or easy to use, people just won't wear it consistently. Compliance drops.
Which defeats the purpose.
Exactly.
And what about getting those new innovations out there? Is that a bottleneck?
It can be.
Yeah.
The researcher mentions that. Getting through the regulatory approvals, setting up manufacturing for totally new designs. It's complex. It costs money. So some promising ideas might stay in the lab longer than we'd like.
Okay, so those are the main restraints. But looking forward, what are the exciting trends? Where's the innovation really pushing things?
Well, one big trend is towards modularity and real customization.
So not just small, medium, large.
Right. Think 3D scanning a patient's arm, then 3D printing a brace that fits perfectly. Or braces you can adjust maybe less support needed as you heal.
Okay, that makes sense. And then there's the smart tech angle, which sounds pretty futuristic. What does a smart elbow brace even do?
Hey, yeah. It's about embedding sensors right into the brace.
The sensors for what?
To track movement, like your range of motion, how you're positioning your arm, maybe even the forces involved.
Oh.
And that data, it can be sent to your phone or your therapist's tablet. It gives real-time, objective feedback, could even guide your exercises.
So the brace becomes kind of a data collector and a coach.
Sort of, yeah. It's blending the physical support with data-driven recovery. Plus, there's a big push for just making them lighter, more portable, easier to wear while staying active, and really listening to patients earlier in the design process.
Okay, so putting it all together, this market is clearly, well, pretty dynamic. It's changing how we deal with injuries and orthopedic care.
Definitely.
You've got this rising need from common problems fueled by some really cool tech advancements.
Right.
but still facing those real-world challenges like cost and just making them comfortable enough for people to actually use.
It's a fascinating mix. It's definitely reshaping things for both patients and the clinicians trying to help them.
So maybe the final thought to leave people with, as we see this push toward smarter, more personalized braces, often used at home, how might that change who actually gets access to really effective, maybe even data-guided rehab down the line? Something to think about.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.